Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
True crime with a dash of the paranormal, the garish, the strange, and the darkly comic. I'm Zevin Odelberg, host of Kinda Murdery, a podcast that's about more than just murder. It's my very own pocket dimension, home to a curated collection of bizarre and compelling stories. The unsolved, the unsettling, and the unbelievable. I cover it all, just so long as it's kinda murdery. That's right, folks. Just like it says in the intro, I am Zevin Odelberg, and this is Kinda Murdery. Some of you may be familiar with The Talented Mr. Ripley, a book by Patricia Highsmith published in 1995, introducing the character of Tom Ripley, who decides that he quite fancies the aristocratic, wealthy life of his friend Dickie Greenleaf and decides to take it. Maybe you haven't read the book, but you may have heard of the movie by the same name starring Matt Damon and Jude Law. Regardless, it's fine if you haven't. I only bring it up because today I'm bringing you a true story that has many parallels to the pulse-pounding, thrilling tale of Ripley as told by Patricia Highsmith. But there's a big difference. That story is fictional, and this one really happened. So if you're ready, please join me now as we uncover what truths we can and solve what mysteries we may. Kinda Murderies, The Talented Mr. Rockefeller, Seduction, Murder, and the Many Lives of Christian Karl Gerhardtsreiter starts now. In the vibrant landscape of the mid-90s, as pastel prints, shoulder pads, permed hair, and other questionable fashion choices were giving way to the flannel lumberjacks, tattered jeans, and grimy heroin chic of the Seattle grunge scene, Sandra Boss, a Stanford graduate pursuing her MBA at Harvard, was introduced by her sister to a singularly charming and mysterious bachelor named Clark Rockefeller. Rockefeller presented himself as a man of considerable pedigree, claiming descent from the illustrious Rockefeller family known for their monumental influence on American industry and philanthropy. Rockefeller's persona was meticulously crafted, adorned in custom-made designer attire that spoke volumes of his alleged heritage and wealth. His passion for art wasn't just a hobby, but a testament to his refined taste and purportedly deep pockets, with a collection that would be the envy of connoisseurs. The stage for this budding romance was set in Rockefeller's upscale New York apartment, a home befitting his claimed status and financial prowess. Sandra, charmed by the sophistication and allure that Rockefeller exuded, found herself quickly swept up in a whirlwind romance. The connection seemed destined for a fairy tale conclusion, leading to their marriage shortly after their fateful meeting. This union marked the beginning of an exciting journey together, filled with promises of a life woven from the fabric of history, culture, and opulence. Yet this burgeoning tale of love and legacy was set against a backdrop yet to be fully unveiled, with the narrative threads of Rockefeller's life waiting to be untangled. As our story unfolds, we'll discover that those very threads are tied into a Gordian knot more convoluted than Sandra Boss could ever have imagined. For over a decade, Sandra and Clark crafted a life together that, on the surface, mirrored the aspirations and achievements of any successful couple. Central to their shared existence was their daughter, Ray Storrow Mills Rockefeller, affectionately named Snooks, born in 2001. This new addition brought joy and a deeper sense of family to their lives. Boss, with her thriving career as a consultant and considerable personal wealth, was the primary breadwinner, enabling a comfortable lifestyle that seemed to fit perfectly within the narrative that Rockefeller had constructed. Rockefeller, taking on the role of stay-at-home dad, dedicated his time to raising Snooks. However, beneath the veneer of domestic bliss, there were cracks that began to widen over time. Rockefeller's lavish spending of Boss's money and the lifestyle he presented to the world became a point of contention. His tales of high society, once charming and filled with the allure of status, grace, and historical legacy, started to unravel, revealing inconsistencies that Sandra could not ignore. Even more perplexing to Boss was Rockefeller's sudden and inexplicable insistence on moving. These abrupt decisions to relocate were not isolated incidents, but part of a pattern that saw the family uprooting their lives with alarming frequency. Each move seemed to be driven by reasons that Rockefeller kept obscured, adding layers of mystery and unease to their marriage. As the years passed, these fissures grew, casting shadows on the life that they'd built together. The inconsistencies in Rockefeller's stories, the unexplained necessity for frequent relocations, and his cavalier attitude towards spending Boss's money painted a picture of a man increasingly at odds with the persona he had so carefully curated. The marriage, once a source of happiness and stability, began to feel the strain of doubt, omissions, and unwelcome conclusions, leading Boss to question the very foundation of their union and the truth behind the man she had married. Who was he? The question squirmed in Sandra's gut like a ball of snakes, for as time went on he bore less and less resemblance to the Clark Rockefeller she had fallen in love with. In 2007, Sandra Boss and Clark Rockefeller's life together came to a halt when Boss, having confronted the enigmatic and increasingly troubling inconsistencies in her husband's behavior and history, decided to file for divorce. The dissolution of their marriage was not just the end of their personal partnership, but also the beginning of a legal battle that would thrust the mysterious Rockefeller into the spotlight for reasons far beyond the eccentricities Boss had come to question. Given Rockefeller's lack of employment and the opaque nature of his past, the court decisively granted Boss full custody of their daughter. This decision underscored the legal system's recognition of the peculiar circumstances surrounding Rockefeller and the priority of ensuring the child's welfare. In 2008, amidst the aftermath of their divorce and custody arrangements, Rockefeller was allowed 3 court-approved visitations with Snooks. Again, that's the affectionate nickname for their daughter, Ray Storrow Mills Rockefeller. It was during one of these supervised interactions, designed to maintain the father-daughter bond while ensuring Snook's safety, that the unpredictable nature of Rockefeller's character fully emerged. As Ray's worried mother, Sandra Boss, anxiously waited in a Boston hotel room, trusting the legal stipulations to protect her daughter, Rockefeller executed a plan that would shock and confound both Boss and the public. While strolling through the historic Boston Common, a place often associated with leisurely family outings and citywide gatherings, Rockefeller vanished with Snooks. This bold and brazen act of abduction broke the fragile semblance of normalcy Boss had tried to preserve for their daughter's sake. The disappearance sent shockwaves through the community and ignited a nationwide manhunt that turned Rockefeller from a question mark into a wanted fugitive, exposing the depths of his deception and setting the stage for revelations that would unravel his carefully constructed identity. The search for Clark Rockefeller following his audacious disappearance with his daughter morphed rapidly from a standard custody violation case into a perplexing investigation that challenged the very identity of the man at its center. As law enforcement delved into Rockefeller's background in an effort to trace his whereabouts, they encountered a bewildering absence of legitimate personal history. The man who had lived among Boston elite, who had convinced Sandra Boss and many others of his Rockefeller lineage, had managed to exist almost entirely off the grid. No social security card, no driver's license, and not a single credit card bore the name Clark Rockefeller. A startling revelation for someone who had navigated high society with such apparent ease. The complexity of the case deepened when Rockefeller's image was broadcast across national news outlets with an appeal to the public for any information that could lead to his and his daughter's location. The response was as confounding as the man himself. Callers reported recognizing the man in the photograph, but not as Clark Rockefeller. Instead, law enforcement received at least 4 different identities linked to the same face, each suggesting a separate life lived under an alias. This myriad of personas presented investigators with a maze-like puzzle. Rockefeller had not only hidden his true self from his wife and acquaintances, but had seemingly fragmented his identity across multiple lives, leaving a trail of aliases in his wake. The investigation had hit an unprecedented impasse. Law enforcement officials found themselves grappling not just with the task of locating Rockefeller and his daughter, but with unraveling the mystery of a man who had effectively erased his true identity. Each discovered alias led to new questions, expanding the scope of the search and complicating the narrative. The disappearance that had initially seemed like a desperate act by a disgruntled father was revealing itself to be the latest chapter in a long story of deception and mystery, with investigators racing against time to piece together the puzzle before it was too late. The breakthrough in the case came unexpectedly from a mundane act that Clark Rockefeller, or rather Christian Karl Gerhardtsreiter, had not accounted for. An unwashed wine glass from the night before his disappearance. In a narrative replete with dead ends and fabricated identities, this overlooked detail provided investigators with the tangible evidence they desperately needed. A friend, likely unaware of the significance of their observation at the time, informed the police about the glass, still bearing the residue of the evening's wine. The police, seizing upon this new lead, processed the glass for fingerprints, a routine procedure, yet one that had not, until this point, offered any promising leads due to Rockefeller's meticulous avoidance of leaving any traceable records. But finally, the talented Mr. Rockefeller had made a mistake. The fingerprints lifted from the wine glass were run through law enforcement databases, a standard check with little expectation of a significant discovery given Rockefeller's apparent ability to evade identification. But the authorities were in luck. Astonishingly, the prints matched those of Christian Karl Gerhardsreiter, revealing Rockefeller's true identity as a German immigrant who had arrived in the United States nearly 3 decades earlier. This match did not just provide a name, it unveiled a twisting trail of lies, deceit, and a life spent under the radar, constantly shifting identities to elude detection. The fingerprints were the key that began to unlock the mystery of Clark Rockefeller's true past. And that past connected the dots between the man Sandra Boss had married, the father who had abducted his daughter, and a chameleon-like figure who had navigated through society under a guise of fabricated nobility. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the butterfly effect, the hypothesis that the simple flapping of a butterfly's wings could cause atmospheric changes that ultimately result in a hurricane or tornado somewhere else. Well, like the humble butterfly, a simple glass of wine enjoyed with friends had metamorphosized into a pivotal piece of evidence that transformed the investigation, turning a case of parental abduction into a deeper inquiry into the life and crimes of Christian Karl Gerhardsreiter. Our talented Mr. Rockefeller, Christian Karl Gerhardsreiter, was born in the picturesque Bavarian town of Bergen, Germany in 1961. He would embark on a journey at the tender age of 17 that would eventually see him become one of the most mysterious and captivating figures in recent American criminal history. With ambitions that reached far beyond the confines of his small-town upbringing, Gerhardsreiter set his sights on the United States, a land he perceived as ripe with opportunities for reinvention and success. Upon his arrival at JFK Airport, Gerhardsreiter committed his first act of deception on American soil, a harbinger of the complex web of lies he would weave throughout his life. He informed immigration authorities that an American couple had graciously offered to host him while he pursued his education in the U.S. This claim, whether true or fabricated, allowed him entry into the country, setting the stage for his eventual transformation into Clark Rockefeller, among other aliases. This initial step into the United States marked the beginning of Gerhardsreiter's chameleon-like ability to adapt and morph his identity to fit his surroundings and aspirations. His move from Bergen to the bustling streets of New York City symbolized not just a physical journey, but a departure from any semblance of a conventional life path. Gerhardsreiter's story from this point forward would be characterized by an ever-evolving narrative, driven by ambition, imagination, and a profound ability to manipulate those around him. Also, an apparent, almost total lack of moral compass. The story that Christian spun, and I hope you don't mind if I call him Christian going forward, I'm not sure how many times I can see Gerhardsreiter without tying my tongue in knots, but the story that Christian spun at the JFK airport was rooted in a partial truth, and the use of partial truth to build a convincing lie would become a strategy that would be the hallmark of his life in the United States. Indeed, Christian had encountered an American family, the Savios, during a train journey in Germany. Their casual offer of hospitality, should he ever find himself in Berlin, Connecticut, I'm sure that everyone enjoyed the double entendre there, was taken not as the polite gesture it was likely intended to be, but rather as an open invitation. However, the Savio family was unaware that this chance meeting would lead Christian to their doorstep, seeking to take them up on their offer. Upon his unexpected arrival, Gerhardsreiter displayed his early knack for persuasion and manipulation. With no prior arrangement or warning, he managed to convince the Savio family to welcome him into their home, not just as a guest, but under the guise of a foreign exchange student. This arrangement lasted for months, significantly longer than the Savios might have anticipated for a stranger who appeared out of the blue. Christian had leveraged a brief encounter into a prolonged stay. And that's what con men do, folks. They rely on the politeness and inherent goodness of others. They rely on people's natural distaste for conflict and confrontation, on their willingness to give them the benefit of the doubt, and then they take advantage. But back to our story. Within the Savio household, Christian Karl Gerhardtsreiter cultivated an image of European aristocracy, a facade that quickly began to crumble under the weight of daily domestic expectations. His staunch refusal to partake in the most basic of chores, such as making his own breakfast or cleaning his room, struck a discordant note with his hosts. According to Vanity Fair, this behavior not only tested the patience of the Savio family, but also underscored the illusions of grandeur that Gerhardtsreiter sought to maintain. Edward Savio, reflecting on the situation, pointed out, "He made it clear that living in this manner was beneath him." This sentiment, coupled with Christian's avoidance of menial tasks, ultimately led the family to a breaking point. The Savios, having extended their hospitality to someone they believed was a foreign exchange student, found themselves instead hosting an individual whose expectations and self-perceived status placed him above the simple acts of self-care and contribution to household upkeep. The culmination of these tensions resulted in him being asked to leave, a decision that highlighted the earliest cracks in the elaborate identity that he had constructed. Rather than retreat to Germany after his eviction from the Savio household, Gerhardtsreiter sought out additional host families in the U.S., continuing to navigate through small-town New England under his fabricated identities. His ambitions, however, stretched far beyond the confines of Connecticut. Gerhardtsreiter harbored two significant resolutions. First, to solidify his immigration status in the United States permanently, and second, to relocate to California with aspirations of breaking into the acting scene. These ambitions would set the stage for the next chapter of his life in a place synonymous with self-reinvention and dreams, Hollywood. By the time 1980 rolled around, Christian Karl Gerhardtsreiter had taken another step in reinventing his identity, anglicizing his name to Chris Gerhardt. This new alias brought him to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where he began auditing classes, immersing himself in a new environment and community. It was here that Chris Gerhardt crossed paths with Amy Jersild. Their meeting marked a pivotal moment in Gerhardtsreiter's ongoing quest to anchor himself in the United States. The relationship progressed quickly, culminating in marriage on February 20th, 1981. This union, however, was not founded on the typical aspirations of married life, but was a calculated move by Gerhardtsreiter to secure a green card, thereby solidifying his stay in the U.S. The transactional nature of their marriage became evident within weeks of their wedding when Gerhardtsreiter abruptly left, continuing his shape-shifting journey through American society. This departure underscored Gerhardtsreiter's pattern of using relationships and identities as mere stepping stones toward his undefined but ravenous ambitions, leaving a trail of confusion and betrayal in his wake. Upon arriving in California, the ever-evolving, although not morally evolving, Christian Karl Gerhardtsreiter adopted yet another identity, this time transforming into Christopher Chichester, occasionally embellishing his new mask further with Mountbatten as a middle name. This addition was not merely ornamental, it served to fabricate a connection to British nobility, enhancing the allure and mystique of his persona. In a bold move to cement his new identity, he began distributing business cards that proclaimed him to be the 13th Baronet. Yet another not-so-harmless lie that lent an air of aristocratic legitimacy and history to his character. These cards were not just simple pieces of paper, they were meticulously designed, featuring a fake family crest that added layers of depth and intrigue to his fabricated lineage. In the upscale Los Angeles suburb of San Marino, he seamlessly wove himself into the social fabric, leveraging his charm and fabricated lineage to secure a place in the home of Didi Sahus, an elderly and reclusive woman who was taken by his aristocratic pretenses. Christopher Mountbatten Chichester's ambition didn't stop at being the house guest of a reclusive old lady. He audited classes at the University of Southern California Film School, showcasing his dedication to the arts, and even persuaded a local TV station to grant him a slot for a public access show, enhancing his visibility and credibility with the community. However, the situation took a turn for the complex with the arrival of Didi's son John Sohus and his wife Linda. John quickly grew suspicious of the strange guest residing in his mother's home, particularly concerned about the financial implications of their lodger's lifestyle. He noticed the incongruity between Christopher Chichester's supposed nobility and his actions. especially how he seemingly exploited Dee Dee's generosity to finance his luxurious taste in clothing. In 1985, the quiet suburb of San Marino was shaken by the sudden disappearance of Jonathan and Linda Sohus. Gerhardt's writer, then known as Christopher Chichester, offered a vague explanation for their absence, suggesting they had been summoned to Europe for urgent business. This story did little to quell the growing concerns among those who knew the couple, marking the beginning of a mystery that would linger over San Marino for years to come. Not long after the Sohus couple vanished, Christopher Chichester himself disappeared from the community he had worked so diligently to infiltrate. Re-emerging in Connecticut as Christopher Crow, Gerhardt's writer engaged in a suspicious attempt to sell John Sohus's car, but he lacked the necessary registration for such a transaction, and his actions raised red flags, attracting the attention of local authorities, though nothing ultimately came of it. In Connecticut, Christopher Crow managed an audacious feat. He talked his way into an executive position at a broker firm. His ability to infiltrate such a respected position speaks volumes about his persuasive skills and his talent for deception. However, his charade was not to last. The brokerage firm, upon routine verification of his provided social security number, uncovered a shocking discrepancy. The number that Christopher Crow had given them was not his own. It belonged to David Berkowitz, none other than the infamous Son of Sam serial killer who had terrorized New York City. Despite the setback in Connecticut, Gerhardt's writer's cunning and adaptability allowed him to secure 2 other highly paid positions, continuing his pattern of deception and reinvention. However, the semblance of stability and success that Gerhardt's writer found in his professional life was shattered in 1994, when a grim discovery in San Marino rekindled interest in the long-cold case of the missing Sohus couple. The unearthing of a body believed to be John Sohus prompted authorities to renew their investigation, this time focusing on Christopher Crow as a person of interest in connection with the suspected murders. By the time law enforcement began piecing together the connections that might lead them to Gerhardt's writer, he had already vanished into another identity, having assumed the persona of Clark Rockefeller 2 years prior. This latest transformation distanced him further from his past transgressions, leaving authorities grappling with the elusive nature of a man who was a master of disguise and deception. In 1992, in a bold move characteristic of his life so far, Christian Gerhardt's writer shed his previous guises and then emerged as the man this episode is named after, one James Frederick Mills Clark Rockefeller. By attaching himself to the Rockefeller lineage, albeit a purportedly lesser-known branch, Gerhardt's writer tapped into the cachet and prestige of one of America's most storied and wealthy families. This new identity was meticulously crafted to open doors within elite social circles, leveraging the Rockefeller name to gain access to the wealthy upper echelons of society he aimed to impress and manipulate. In 1993, the path of the man now known as Clark Rockefeller crossed with Sandra Boss at a cocktail party in New York City. Boss, a successful and intelligent woman, was captivated by the charm and apparent pedigree of Rockefeller. His polished demeanor and tales of a privileged background quickly won her over, leading her to fall in love with the man she believed to be part of the illustrious Rockefeller family. This meeting marked the beginning of a relationship that would eventually, as we have discussed, lead to marriage, setting the stage for a complex intertwining of lives built on the foundation of Gerhardt writer's lies and deception. Now let's dive into just a few more specifics than we did at the outset about just what happened in that marriage. Over the years of his marriage to Sandra Boss, the facade of Clark Rockefeller began to crumble, revealing a controlling and at times violent temperament beneath the polished exterior. Those within the couple's social orbit started to notice inconsistencies in Rockefeller's elaborate stories of lineage and achievement. The mystique that once drew people to him now prompted questions and doubts, as the puzzle pieces of his supposed life story failed to fit together. In 2006, driven by growing suspicions and the increasingly troubling dynamics of their relationship, Sandra Boss took decisive action. She employed a private investigator to delve into the murky waters of Rockefeller's past, seeking clarity amidst the web of lies. The investigation that ensued peeled back the layers of deception, uncovering the startling truth that the man Sandra had married and with whom she had built a life was not at all who he claimed to be. Armed with the revelation that Rockefeller had been lying about his identity for years, Boss was faced with the undeniable reality of her husband's deceit. The discovery propelled her to file for divorce, seeking to extricate herself and her daughter from the grasp of a man whose entire existence with her had been predicated on falsehoods. This moment marked a turning point not just in their personal lives, but in the unraveling of one of the most audacious cases of identity fraud in recent history. In the divorce settlement, Gerhardt's writer, still masquerading under the guise of Clark Rockefeller, agreed to terms that seemingly prioritized his immediate financial gain and the preservation of his carefully constructed false identity. The agreement granted him $800,000, a substantial sum that for him perhaps represented the means to start anew. Yet the settlement came with a significant caveat that limited his access to his daughter, allowing him only 3 visitations per year. This stipulation underscored the unraveling of his deceptive life, trading financial compensation for the risk of his true identity being scrutinized by court officials. Journalist Mark Seal, who delved deep into the story of Gerhardt's writer, observed a poignant truth amidst the myriad of lies that defined his life. Speaking to NPR, Seal highlighted that the profound love Gerhardt's writer harbored for his daughter was the singular, genuine aspect of his otherwise fabricated existence. Seal's insights shed light on the emotional turmoil that ensued following the custody arrangement. The loss of his daughter, a consequence of the divorce that peeled away the layers of deception, became a catalyst for Gerhardt's writer's subsequent actions. Driven by desperation and the desire to reclaim a relationship with his daughter, Clark Rockefeller orchestrated the bold abduction that we mentioned briefly at the beginning of this episode. During a court-supervised visit in Boston, he executed a plan that allowed him to elude the social worker assigned to oversee the visit. The act of abduction was a dramatic escalation, marking a transition from a life of deceit to one of outright criminal behavior. Clark Rockefeller's actions not only underscored the depth of his affection for his daughter, but also set the stage for a legal and emotional confrontation that would captivate the public and expose the full extent of his fraudulent life. In a familiar pattern of evasion and reinvention, Rockefeller adopted yet another identity following the abduction of his daughter. This time he transformed into Chip Smith, assuming the persona of a sea captain, a guise that allowed him to blend into a new environment undetected. With his daughter in tow, Chip Smith found refuge in an apartment in Baltimore, seemingly a step ahead of the law once again. However, the net was closing in. After a tense 5-day manhunt, the FBI employed a clever ruse to draw out Chip Smith. According to NBC, agents concocted a scenario designed to exploit his new maritime identity. They informed Gerhardt's writer, aka Chip Smith, that his catamaran, presumably a prized possession of the sea captain persona, was taking on water at the marina. This urgent situation compelled him to leave the safety of his apartment, walking directly into the waiting embrace of the FBI. The moment he stepped outside, agents quickly moved in to surround him, effectively ending his flight from justice. The resolution of the intense manhunt brought a sigh of relief as Gerhardt's writer's daughter was found unharmed, spared from further involvement in her father's tangled web of deceit and criminal behavior. Following his apprehension by the FBI, Gerhardt's writer, widely known by his alias Clark Rockefeller, faced the legal consequences of his actions. For the abduction of his daughter, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison, a judgment that at the time seemed to close the chapter on his long history of impersonation and fraud. However, the legal saga surrounding Clark Rockefeller was far from over. Shortly after his conviction for the abduction, authorities turned their attention to a darker chapter in his past, reigniting the investigation into the 1985 disappearance of Jonathan Sohus, a case that had lingered in the shadows of Gerhardt's writer's fabricated identities. With Gerhardt's writer now in custody, police began to piece together evidence for his involvement in Sohus's murder, a crime that had occurred during his time in San Marino under the alias of Christopher Chichester. That's Christopher Mountbatten Chichester, 13th Baronet, if you'll remember. The mystery deepened with the acknowledgement that Linda Sohus, Jonathan's wife, remained missing, her fate unresolved. The absence of her body added a haunting dimension to the case, complicating efforts to fully understand the events of 1985. As the investigation into Jonathan Sohus' murder gained momentum, the prospect of facing charges for his decade-old crime loomed over Gerhardt's writer, aka Clark Rockefeller, aka Christopher Mountbatten Chichester. In 2013, the long arm of the law finally caught up with Christian Karl Gerhardt's writer, from the small hamlet of Bergen in Bavaria, Germany, ending a saga of deception that spanned decades. and crisscrossed the American social landscape. Convicted for the murder of Jonathan Sohus, a crime that had remained unsolved since 1985, Gerhardt's writer received a sentence of 27 years to life in prison. So that's the end of our story of Clark Rockefeller, but it should be noted that although I say the end, should Christian Gerhardt's writer be released from prison after 27 years, which would be 16 years from now, he'll be 79 years old, and if he's still alive and kicking, the perfect age to impersonate a genteel moneyed aristocrat once again. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. So now that we've got to the end of the story, I'm going to try a new segment of the show that I've never done before. It's called 5 Key Takeaways and the Moral of the Story. Not a very creative title, I know, but that's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to share with you 5 things that this story made me think about that may be applicable to our own lives, and then I'm going to give you what I think is the moral of the story. You should, of course, draw your own conclusions. All right, here we go. Cue up the sound effects. 5 Key Takeaways. Number 1. The inevitability of truth. Clark Rockefeller's story is a testament to the relentless pursuit of truth. Despite the layers of identities and stories he constructed, the foundation of lies that he built eventually crumbled beneath him. This reinforces our belief that no matter how elaborate a deception, truth finds a way and often brings with it the weight of justice. Number 2. The complexity of human identity. Through the prism of Christian Gerhardt writer's life, we are compelled to examine the fluidity and complexity of our own identities. His ability to transform suggests that identity can be as much a creation as it is a given. Yet, this story cautions us about the seductive allure of reinvention when it crosses into the realm of deceit. Reinvention can be a powerful and a positive thing, but it must be morally grounded. And the story of Clark Rockefeller reminds us that authenticity holds intrinsic value that no fabrication, especially fabrication for one's own selfish aims, can replace. Number 3. The dangers of unchecked charisma. Charisma, while a powerful tool for connection and leadership, can also serve as a cloak for manipulation. Clark Rockefeller, or Gerhardt's writer's charm, allowed him to navigate through society, drawing in those around him, deceiving them for his own gains and selfish purpose. His story is a cautionary reminder to look through beyond surface charm and seek the substance within, valuing integrity over allure. It's a version of the bright flowers are usually the poisonous ones, or the brightly colored snakes are usually the poisonous ones. Number 4. The strength of skepticism, and I love this one. In an age where information is plentiful yet often unvetted to say the least, the saga of Clark Rockefeller underscores the importance of skepticism. It reminds us to question, to verify, and to look beyond the presented narrative. We all need to be champions of critical thinking as a bulwark against deception. And number 5, the value of resilience. And this is an important one. The resilience of those entangled in Rockefeller's web, especially Sandra Boss and the Sohus family, highlights the human capacity to overcome betrayal and tragedy. Their journey through Gerhardt's writer's maze of lies to emerge seeking truth and justice illuminates the strength inherent in facing reality, no matter how painful that reality might be, the value of resilience, and the power of looking a hard truth in the face. So those are the 5 key takeaways: the inevitability of truth, the complexity of human identity, the dangers of charisma unchecked, the strength of skepticism, and the value of resistance. Now it's time for the moral. Let's cue up the sound effects again. The moral. As a modern fable, the story of Clark Rockefeller not only captivates, but educates, offering a mirror to our own lives and choices. It serves as a reminder that while we may be fascinated by the tales of those who weave illusions, or by the wealthy, the powerful, or the aristocratic, it is in truth authenticity and integrity where we find our greatest strength and security. And the moral of this story is that the fabric of truth, no matter how intricately concealed by the threads of deception, will ultimately reveal itself, affirming the enduring values of authenticity, integrity, and the vigilant pursuit of reality, especially shared reality, in our lives. I'm Zevin Odelberg. That was the moral of the story, and this has been Kinda Murdery.
If you like the show, please subscribe, review, and tell your friends. You can find us on social media at Kinda Murdery or email at kindamurdery@gmail.com.